We have a lot of misconceptions about the term human sexuality, and so our talk today is going to be to explore some of the key issues in human sexuality with regards to folks with intellectual disabilities in our community, and just what sexuality is and how it impacts our everyday life, whether we have a disability or not. I am Sophia Fortin. I am the My Life, My Body facilitator at Yukon Association for Community Living. YACL is a nonprofit organization dedicated to community inclusion up here in the Yukon. We're based in Whitehorse, Yukon. And My Life, My Body is a sexual health and healthy relationship program designed specifically for the disability community. So we offer a range of programs, including friendship circle, workshops and training, as well as one-to-one supports for individuals and families. And this workshop series has been designed to help people understand the breadth of human sexuality and how to manage or interact with everyday issues that we see. So we're going to get started. In terms of the webinar format, you can ask questions, you can raise your hand or put something in the chat box. It isn't anonymous, unfortunately. If you would like to send an anonymous question, you can email me, sophia@ycommunityliving.com, and I will respond to your questions there as they come in. We're going to be talking today for about an hour, 45 minutes. We'll leave some room for questions at the end. Hit me up anytime and we will get started. So when we talk about human sexuality, I want you to just think for a minute about what are some of the first things that come to mind when you hear that word. There's a lot of different things that pop up for people. Some of us think about sex, some of us think about sexual intercourse, some of us think about reproductive organs, penises, vaginas, body parts, maybe sex ed class when we were younger. There's a lot of different things that come to mind, but often we have a very narrow view of what sexuality is and how it bakes into our everyday life. So today what we're going to talk about is a model of human sexuality. As we go through, we're going to address 4 different myths of human sexuality around the issues of sexuality and disability. And we'll cover a little bit the alphabet of human sexuality. So you might hear some new terms today, and I'm going to do my best to define them for you so we can all be operating from a common language as we move forward. So myth number 1, sexuality is only about sex. Sex, the word sex, actually refers to the biological and physical characteristics that define every man and every woman. So as an example, your sex is either biologically female or male. The term can also be used to mean sexual activity or to have sex. So that's what sex means. But what does sexuality mean? Such longer word. The sort of official definition of sexuality is defined as the capacity for sexual feelings, sexual activity, and sexual orientation. And to me, this is a really narrow definition and one that doesn't quite properly describe everything that is a part of sexuality and our human sexuality, what defines us as sexual beings in our humanity. So today we're going to talk about a model of human sexuality that will just help us to pull apart this word and understand a little bit better the aspects that are incorporated into our everyday life. We're going to be looking at a model that was put together by an academic named Davey that tries to explain the areas of life that our sexuality touches. So I just want to kind of point out that I know as we're launching into a conversation here around sexuality and disability that this is a challenging topic. And it's a challenging topic whether we're talking about sexuality within the disability community and even just in the regular community, in our neurotypical community. We have a lot of societal shame and taboo around sexuality that really limits our ability to speak about it in an open way. And it's my job today to really model comfort with this material. It's really important. It pertains to our bodies, it pertains to who we are and how we engage with the world. And we're all going to be coming to this topic with our own experiences, our own beliefs and values. This is very much a values-laden conversation. So I do my best to speak clearly about the facts and about the research, to share where my values are guiding my beliefs around this. I very much want to make sure that this is about an open conversation to hear different perspectives and different values on this topic so that we can learn from each other and overall sort of expand our awareness of this issue. So I know it can be challenging. I'm encouraging everyone to sort of try to wear their scientist goggles. When I teach children, we talk to them about how they're body scientists, and scientists think of new things they haven't learned as very interesting. And they do a little chin rub and go, interesting. And I encourage everyone to sort of try to approach the topic with some new curiosity and some new eyes, and to look at what values or beliefs they have in relation to the information that we're sharing today. So the first aspect of the model of human sexuality put forward by Dennis Daly is the idea that we have the sexual self here in the middle of our model. And one key aspect of it is reproduction. And this is kind of the first place we go when we talk about sex and sexuality. We tell our children about how sexuality is to make babies or how babies are made and where they come from. We tend to be fairly comfortable in our education system teaching youth about their reproductive anatomy, so their genitals, about conception, so how babies are made and how they came into this world, and a little bit as well about STIs, so the common ailments that one can bump into during sexual activity, during reproductive activity. And often there tends to be a pretty abstinence-focused message in many schools. There also can be comprehensive education, which is more focused on really the belief that youth make better decisions about their bodies and about their relationships when they have real information to make those decisions on. There's a really great study out of BC. They've been doing a adolescent health survey for over 25 years now, where they interview youth about their health-related activities. Sexuality is a part of that. And what we've seen is that over 25 years of sexual health education that's comprehensive, youth are waiting longer to have their first sexual encounter. And they're talking about wanting to be ready as the reason that they're waiting longer. So when we give youth information about their bodies and how to make choices about their bodies, they can make safer choices. You'll notice today I'm also going to really bounce back and forth between sort of the neurotypical and disability world. This model applies regardless if you have a disability, an intellectual disability or not. We're all human beings and it's all really the same. So I'll do my best to bring in disability examples, but it's all coming from the same place. A lot of our education around reproduction is also very preventative. So depending on when and how people grew up, some of the education they've received in this area might have been very kind of scare tactic focused. We used to really talk about STIs in a very scare tactic way. And most of our education is based around how to not make a baby when you don't want a baby and how to not get an STI. And we don't talk a lot about the other elements of human sexuality. We also tend to talk in reproduction about puberty. So that would be when folks start to understand the parts of their body that differ from the other sex, why they differ, how they differ, and what kind of changes their bodies can experience as they grow. So reproduction is very much about sort of the biological aspects of sex as they relate, or sexuality, sorry, as they relate to our physical body. The next aspect of the human sexuality model, is in relation to identity and our sexual identity. This is really about who am I and how I show up in the world. And I've got a really wonderful chart here from the Trans Student Educational Resources Center that talks about different aspects of sexual identity. So if we start in the middle there, we'll see the column or the row called sex assigned at birth. And this is one of the common places where we start. So folks can be assigned at birth, female, male, or other. The other word for that is intersex. So when we are born, we come out of our mother's bodies. The doctors take one look at our genitals and they determine if we have a penis that we are male, if we have a vulva, we are female. For some babies, they might have ambiguous genitals, so they may have a vagina but some testicles, or they might have a penis and ovaries at the same time. There's so many different chromosomal ways that humans can be organized. We've sort of been raised with this false belief that there's only XX or XY chromosomes, when in fact there can be many, many different combinations of X, XY, triple XY, XY with a little doohickey on it. All of these can result in differentiations in genitals and can result in someone being determined as intersex, so neither female nor male. So intersex might be a new word for you today. The old word that is no longer appropriate to use anymore for that was hermaphrodite. That might be a word that you used to be familiar with. So really, what's between our legs can have a huge impact on who we are in the world. And that's related to the very top one when we start to talk about gender identity and gender expression. So gender identity has to do with whether my sense of self correlates with the genitals that I have. So as an example, I am a woman. I was assigned female at birth, and I identify with being a woman. I enjoy being a woman. I enjoy behaving and dressing in certain ways that could be described as feminine. I am a cisgendered person, or cis meaning same. Other folks may not feel the same way. They may be male assigned at birth, but they really choose to operate in the world in a very feminine way. They may want to identify as a female, be addressed as a female or a woman or a girl in the world. And so this person would have a trans identity, trans meaning different or opposite. So we have cisgendered folks where their sex assigned at birth matches their identity and gender expression. And we have trans folks where their sex assigned at birth does not match their gender identity and gender expression. These things play into our sense of identity in huge ways. Even if we are a cis person and we're not battling the struggles of working through a trans identity, we may not always feel comfortable being a woman or a man in the world, or we may not feel comfortable with some aspects of femininity or masculinity. Our gender can impact how much we're paid, what kinds of jobs we can do, how people perceive us in the world, how we're expected to behave, and how we're expected to dress. And when we don't always follow these kind of societal rules, we can run into challenges or struggles as well as rewards. So understanding who we are and how men and women and folks who identify as other than men and women operate in the world, how safe these folks feel in the world and how accepted they feel in the world is a huge part of a person's sense of identity and sense of safety in the world. It's also a huge part of how they relate to others and how successfully they relate to others in the world. The last piece to this is about sexual and emotional attraction. So this is where we talk about being gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual. So the general monopoly or ABCs that we're talking about there, gay can refer to men who are sexually or emotionally attracted to men. Lesbian can refer to women who are sexually attracted or emotionally attracted to women. Bisexual folks are sexually and emotionally attracted to either sex, and pansexual folks might be sexually or emotionally attracted to anyone. So for them, it's much more about the human being that they love or are sexually attracted to, and less about the gender of that person. So many people are really attached to their sexual identity, and others are not, right? It can be a big part of one's identity to be part of the lesbian and gay community. It can be part of one's identity to be referred to as a butch lesbian or a femme lesbian or other terms like that. There's communities and cultures related to these identities where people can feel accepted and welcomed, and there also can be challenges and struggles to accepting or identifying oneself differently than one's community accepts. So sexual identity has a lot to do with more than just who we like to have sex with. It has to do with the genitals that are on our body and how we express ourselves in the world as a man, as a woman, as a trans person, as a gender non-conforming person. So that would be someone who chooses to be neither man nor woman. They don't want to be conforming to any gender identity. That's just kind of a tip of the iceberg sense of how our sexuality plays into our sense of who we are and our acceptance of who we are. Moving right along, the next piece of our sexual self model, our model of human sexuality, is the idea of intimacy. So sexuality and relationships are two-way streets, and intimacy is all about the ability to form really deep connections with folks, sexual or non-sexual connections, where we really feel seen by another person. Sometimes we'll hear the words intimacy being pulled apart as into me you see, or the idea of seeing one's self reflected through the eyes of another. This is about deep personal relationships, and it's about having the skills to start and maintain deep personal relationships. This is about learning to be vulnerable. This is about learning to accept one's identity and learn how to express it around different people. This is about knowing how to ask for what it is that we want. In a disability context in particular, intimacy really is about friendships and social intimacy first and sexual intimacy second. So most of our clients are not walking around saying, I want sex. They are saying, I am lonely, I want friends, or I want a boyfriend or girlfriend. 3 days without social intimacy affects our mental health. The research shows us this. 3 days without sex won't kill anyone. People really struggle in our communities when they are lonely and isolated and when they don't have the skills to develop deep friendships. I have a wonderful, well, not a wonderful, an illustrative story that I like to share from Dave Kingsberger, who's a disability and sexuality expert in Canada. And he talks often about this one client. They'd been working on an amazing individual learning plan, and this client was rocking all of her goals, and she could do her dishes and tie her own shoes and get to work on her own. She was managing all of these beautiful independence goals and really working towards living on her own, as her mother was working hard to do sort of this planning of what would happen when she was no longer there. But the mother came in quite distraught one day while they were having one of these learning plan kind of check-in meetings. And the mother was realizing that you or I or any sort of average person really has an entire constellation or an entire night sky of bright light, of stars in our life. And these are people that we can call when we need support, when we're looking for humor or fun or a nice ear. We have a range of folks that we've met throughout our entire life, people we can ask for advice, for expertise. And when she thought about it, she realized that she was probably the only bright light in her daughter's life, the only constellation in that sky. And she got really, or the only star really in that sky. And she got quite worried about what was going to happen to her daughter when her time had passed and she'd moved on and there was no stars left in that sky for her daughter. So it's important to think about intimacy. It's important to think about sexuality from the perspective not only of deeply fulfilling intimate relationships, but just deeply fulfilling friendships and having a social world where we feel seen and recognized for who we are, loved for who we are, and where we can enjoy the company of others. The other thing that I'd like to speak to in the world of disability specifically is that this can also play out as sort of unrealistic fantasies about friendships, relationships, and dating. So folks not quite understanding what makes up a true friendship, right? How many folks in our lives have friends that are unpaid staff, and how many of those friends are not paid staff that are paid to be in their life? And how much are our clients and our family members relying on media, movies, books, or other things that they enjoy to build stories for themselves about who is ideal to date or be in a relationship with, and how one goes about dating or forming a relationship. We're going to talk about this a little bit more later on, but the media isn't always the best role model or example for how a relationship sort of naturally evolves. And so folks often have quite unrealistic expectations about how that's all supposed to happen, or they have no clue about how to make it happen, how to build a friendship with someone. So these are the pieces that are covered by intimacy. So far we've talked about 3 core pieces of the model of the sexual self to help us understand how sexuality is baked into our everyday life. So we've talked about reproduction, which is really understanding our bodies, knowing our body parts, knowing how babies are made, how to avoid making a baby if we don't want one, and knowing how to avoid STIs. Identity is all about really a true acceptance of oneself, as well as understanding gender roles and how different people operate in society, what is expected or anticipated about how we dress and how we show up in the world. And the third level is really about intimacy. So this is about forming deep bonds and deep relationships, whether they be sexual or not sexual, where we feel seen and heard and acknowledged for who we are in the world. We're going to continue on with 2 final pieces. Sexualization is definitely a very real part of the model of human sexuality. And this has both negative and neutral aspects to it. So sexualization from a very cut and dry perspective is defined as using sex as a tool. So on the one hand, babies use sex as a tool. They flirt to get what they want. They're not willingly, being sexual, but they are flirting to get what they want. And of course, marketers, advertising companies are constantly using sex and sexuality to sell us things so that we can part with our hard-earned money. Sexualization, of course, is about the abuse of power and how certain people will use sexuality as a way to have power or control over others. And this is an area of concern that we talk about often in the disability community. We know that folks with intellectual disabilities are the most likely to be victims of many forms of abuse, including sexual abuse. And it's one where we're not quite sure what to do sometimes. The statistics can be quite frightening. In fact, there's sort of a myth here too, which Dave Hingsberger talks about, which is the idea that we all kind of have, society as a whole sort of has this notion that folks with intellectual disabilities are either asexual, so not interested in sex at all, or young, virginal, too young to sort of understand these concepts intellectually, even though they might be in adult bodies. Or the other scale, or the other side of the scale, is that society can view folks with intellectual disabilities, especially men with intellectual disabilities, as sexual predators, as unable to control or understand their sexual urges. And there's a few things that I want to say about that, which is when we talk to forensic psychologists who work with youth of all kinds about sexualized assault or different sexual infractions, what we learn is that 95% of the time there was a lack of sexual education. So there was a lack of an understanding of what appropriate behavior was expected, what appropriate touch is on the part of the youth. And with a little bit of education and support, this person was able to reintegrate back into society with no issues. Positive, shame-free sex education that is based in facts and information is the most effective preventative measure for abuse, both the experience of abuse and being a victimizer. So when folks get the information they need about their body parts and the proper names for those body parts, they are able to accurately report what is happening to those body parts and if people are touching them in inappropriate ways. When they can demonstrate to a potential perpetrator that they understand their body very well and that they understand who can and cannot touch them and that they have bodily autonomy, they are less likely to be victimized because they are pinned as someone who is likely to report. And so therefore, they're less likely to be victimized. Also, when folks with intellectual disabilities have information about how to appropriately engage sexually with others in their world, when they know about appropriate touch and flirting and what dating looks like and is supposed to look like, they can come from a very empowered place. They can avoid making some of the foibles or mistakes or being teased into or taken advantage of making inappropriate choices because they don't have the information. Hands down, what we know about this is that information is the prevention tool, as is confidence and a good, strong sense of self. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. We do have a whole webinar about abuse. You can check out the website hsyukon.com and look up the dates for that, and we'll have a whole module on abuse prevention, recognition, and all that stuff. So our last piece here is about sensuality. And I won't talk about this too long, but basically sensuality is about touch, and again related to intimacy. So there is some overlap in these areas, right? But sensuality is about living through the world or living through our senses. It's about knowing how to be in touch with our sense of taste, with our sense of touch, with our sense of smell, knowing how to appropriately use those, understanding private and public space, having a good sense of a positive sense of our body image, a positive connection to our bodies, and really understanding pleasure. So being able to see the positive sides of life, really being able to take in all the wonderful hormones that go off in your brain when you really take a moment to enjoy that strawberry that you're eating. All bodies do well with pleasure, and I don't mean sexual pleasure, I mean sensual pleasure. Our bodies are literally healed when we are relaxed and feeling good and enjoying things that bring us pleasure. Touch is also really important. Babies die if they are not touched. Teenagers, seniors, and I would argue folks with intellectual disabilities can be the least touched humans on the earth. And it really, really impacts their quality of life. So knowing how to touch others, how to manage personal boundaries, private and public space, these are all sort of the daily lived realities of understanding to be a sensual person. So this is our model of human sexuality, the whole piece. We've got reproduction, identity, intimacy, sexualization, sensuality. All of these things make up the sexual self. We can see that it's a really wide range of issues and everyday life situations. And really our sexuality is core to who we are as a human and core to our understanding of who we are and how to connect with others. And we know that understanding how to connect well with others is very much at the foundation of a person's well-being, from their mental health to their literacy rates to their physical health. All of these things are really related to a person's social emotional well-being, meaning their emotional connections and their intimate connections in life. Kind of close on that, again, Dave Hingsberger talks about how learning how, when, where, and with whom to interact and express our sexuality as a male or female or other is very important to our well-being and to how well we will be welcomed and accepted by society. So when we're talking about the broader goals of inclusion for the disability community, understanding these unwritten rules of sexuality, of intimacy, of identity, of touch are extremely important to achieving inclusion for our family members, for our clients. It's important how welcomed they're going to be and how accepted they're going to be by their society and by their community. So a few other myths we're going to close in on before we wrap up. Myth number 2, people with intellectual disabilities are not sexual. So the facts here are that all human bodies have hormones, and all bodies, once they go through puberty, experience sexual urges and romantic desires. All bodies also need to be touched, and all humans need to experience intimacy and close relationships. So where folks sometimes really struggle when we're talking about sexuality and intellectual disability is that we may have a person who's intellectually operating at age 5, 6, 7, but they're operating in the world and perceived by the world often in the body of a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old. And what we forget in this is that their body has gone through puberty. Their body is experiencing all of the adult urges and sensations that all adult bodies experience. And when we neglect or when we don't find ways to help the 5-year-old brain understand what's going on with the body, well, we can create a recipe for many challenging behaviors and many challenging community interactions. Sexuality is our human right. It is every child's human right to learn about their bodies and what decisions they can make about their body. And it is every adult's right on this planet to be safe in sexual identity and sexual expression and be given opportunities to explore their sexual identity and sexual expression. How independent any one individual or client can be, how we can support them in their independence, and what decisions they have are really key to and at the center of a life with a person with an intellectual disability. And so sexuality can be an extremely challenging topic to approach because it is very much about autonomy and about the right and ability to make informed decisions about one's body and about one's relationship. So when we're working with clients and family members and when we're working on independence and autonomy and thinking about really important questions like which decisions this person can make and how we give them information so that they can make those decisions with confidence and make decisions that don't have negative impacts on their entire immediate family or immediate community. Sexuality questions are a really huge part of this. We're talking about folks' right and ability to make a decision to reproduce or have a child and the really real impact that that can have on a family and on a community and on the child. But we're also talking about people's basic human right to make that choice or to make the choice to be in a relationship, even if it may not be the most supportive. The bottom line is that adults with intellectual disabilities are adults, and unless they're under guardianship, they have the same right to make decisions as everyone else. So what we really want to do is make sure that we are supporting them to make those decisions and ensuring that they have the right information to make good decisions and that they have good people in their life who can support them to make those decisions as well. That is myth number 2. Myth number 3. So we often worry or fear that sex ed will introduce sexuality to my child or to my client. And I have one question for you before I move to the next slide, and that really is, if you only knew about sexuality from the media, so if everything you knew about sex, reproduction, intimacy, identity, touch, if all those things, the only way you had ever learned about them was through the media, what would you know? And the answer is quite a bit. What would you have learned about gender and how appropriate it is to dress in certain ways or what you're supposed to look like? What would you know about sexual orientation and who it's okay to like or not like? What would you know about crushes? What do you think about Pepe Le Pew and his aggressive pursuit of the women that he has feelings for? Or often our representation, starry-eyed emotions. What would you know about touch and consent and when it's okay to touch others and when it's not? And what would you know about asking someone on a first date or being pushy? What would you know about love or about bodies? So the hidden curriculum is going all the time and it is everywhere. Children from any age have been exposed to the sexuality curriculum from the day they were born just by watching us interact in our family, watching the way we love and touch each other, the way we connect, the way we are intimate, watching which jobs mom does and which jobs dad does in the house, watching how their siblings might be treated differently. All of these are lessons in sexuality that come from a very young age, from the community and the family that we live in. They also come from the media that we consume. They're pretty much inevitable. And even if we don't consume much media, even we just have to walk past the shelves at Shoppers Drug Mart and see all the magazine covers to be learning a thing or two about sexuality and gender. So we can take charge and we can take control of this conversation and make sure that our family members and our clients are learning facts and not fiction, that they're learning this in a shame-free and values-based way. So the beauty of taking control of this conversation as a parent or family member in particular is that you get to contextualize this information within the values of your family. And this is where different understandings and values about sexuality can be shared. We need to destigmatize the word sexuality so that we can start to understand all of the facets that affect our clients and our family members and work against this flood of messages, which is not often very supportive or helpful, so that we can build realistic expectations and healthy understandings of what a good and positive relationship looks like. So sexual education is not the first place we're going to interact with sexuality. We are learning about it all the time. It's the hidden curriculum. And so what we want to do as clients, as family members, as society is take charge of this conversation, take it back from the media so that we can really share it in a values-based way. Myth number 4 is that my client or family member, pardon the typo, will become sexual if they learn about sexuality. And so what we know from sex education research, like I was saying earlier in the call today, is that exactly the opposite is the case. So 25 years of longitudinal studies of youth in British Columbia of all ages and backgrounds show us that the more information we give youth about their bodies, about relationships, about sex and how to do it and what it looks like, about the risks, and about, the rewards, about the beauties of sexuality, the more we give this information, the more youth and young people will make informed choices, and the less likely they are to go wandering around the back ends of the internet or talking to people that they maybe shouldn't be talking about to get information because they don't have a reliable, trustworthy source of information. So when youth have this information, they are less likely to be victimized. They are waiting longer to choose to have their first sexual experience, and they're doing so on their own terms, making sure that they feel good about what's happening and they're okay with the choices that they're making. And they're less likely to experiment blindly, not knowing what's going on, learning just by doing and trying things out, which can lead to unwanted trauma and unwanted children and other results. So when we talk about this, we want to make sure that, or rather, when we shut down conversations about sexuality for fear that it may make someone more sexual or may open the door to sexual activity, what we're telling them is that we don't talk about this here. And we're also telling them something bad will happen to you if you know this information. These are not the things that we want them to know. We want them to know that we are a reliable, trustworthy source of information. We want them to know that if we don't have the information, we will go find it for them. And we want them to know that questions about their bodies and about relationships and about touch are really important questions. And the more they know about this, the more they are likely to protect themselves and to make choices that are good for them and their bodies. In summary, I just want to say human sexuality is critical to human happiness and part of our everyday life. So again, when I say human sexuality, I'm talking about that entire monopoly, that model of human sexuality. Knowing who we are, understanding how we relate to others, loving and accepting our bodies is important to human happiness and part of our everyday life. Access to information about our bodies and how to make decisions is a human right, and it also is proven to be an effective strategy for abuse prevention and for avoiding becoming a victimizer. The hidden sex ed curriculum is everywhere, and taking charge of this conversation is extremely important because we can make sure that the people in our lives are getting the facts to make the right decisions, that they know that these are good, important questions to be asking, and we can redirect and share information in a way that is in alignment with the values of our home and our community, and correct any of the myths that they might be seeing in the media. And finally, we all have a role to play in supporting clients and family members to learn appropriate sexual behaviors so that they can thrive. I say all the time as a sex educator, I can work one-on-one with clients, I can work one-on-one with family members to be talking to them through the theory and the information. But there's no better learning opportunity than when they're out on the street with a job coach and they go to inappropriately hug someone that they don't know. That job coach has a much better ability than me to intervene and provide a learning opportunity. Family members, the same, or really provide a role in being that trusted adult that can provide information and reliable information that's fact-based and guided by the values of the family. So we all have a role to play in supporting our clients and family members. I'm going to open it up to questions now. I put my resources up here on the page, so you can check out the website, hsucon.com. All of our future webinars are scheduled and listed there. We also offer training to organizations and agencies, so please give me a call anytime if you'd like to do customized training for your agency. If you are a frontline service worker or a family member and you're wondering about how to work through a particular behavior with your family member or client, or you're wondering more about what we talked about today, please call me or email me anytime. The door is open to talk and to find out what you need. Email us anytime. Let us know the supports that would most help you to tackle this challenging topic. It's a really important one. I hope you've learned something today. We covered 4 myths and the model of human sexuality. This information is going to be a really good basis for the future webinar, so feel free to refer to it anytime. We'll be putting it up on the website shortly. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you so much. Bye now.